You're listening to Truth Hurts podcast, presented by myself, Mark Sheppard, and special guests. Welcome to this episode of Truth Hurts podcast with myself, Mark Sheppard. I have a wonderful guest with me today. Her name is Yvonne. She's a carer, and she's been caring for her father for a number of years. We're doing this show specifically about dementia and Alzheimer's, which is very important to help raise awareness about it. Unfortunately, a lot of people go through their lives not knowing, not understanding it, not knowing what kind of symptoms to look for or how it actually impacts your life. So today we're going to have a discussion about our experiences with Alzheimer's and dementia, how we noticed the first signs, and then how we went from signs to symptoms to diagnosis. And hopefully this will help you and give you a bit more of an insight as to what Alzheimer's and dementia is all about. Welcome, Yvonne.
Good afternoon, Mark.
Let's go from the beginning. You've cared for your father for a number of years, but he didn't start off with Alzheimer's, did he? He had other ailments.
Yeah, he was he started to have issues around just general sort of health issues. I think part of it was age related, things like, well, he had diabetes was one, but he also had issues around sort of problems with his hearing, just problems with eyesight, just those sorts of things that start to come when you get into a certain age. He also used to smoke when he was very young. So he also had problems with his lungs as well. So that didn't sort of help him. And he had a pacemaker. So he had various ailments as well.
So going from the original ailments that he had, so you was his primary carer?
Yes. So I became his carer as his health deteriorated. Yeah. So
what kind of adjustments did you need to make in your life to become that full-time carer for your father?
It was really sort of just being available for him, really. He had problems walking, so he had a mobility issue as well. So it was be shopping for him, paying all his bills, taking him to all his appointments, just really popping in on a daily basis to see if he was okay, doing his cleaning in his house. And sort of just speaking to doctors about his any sort of health, sort of medicines he required. It was just sort of really doing everything I could because he couldn't do a lot for himself, and he didn't really understand sort of what was always wrong with him. So it'd be trying to have the discussions with him about what is your problems, what can I help you with, Dad. So yeah, I was like his advocate, I suppose, in a way as well. Yeah.
Okay, so that is a lot of things that you needed to do for him at the start. But where was he staying? Was he living with you? Was he in sheltered housing? Where was he at the time?
He used to live with me, but I lived in a townhouse, and we had the bathroom was upstairs, and he used to stay sort of on the second floor, and the kitchen was on the first floor. But as his issues deteriorated, certainly with his mobility, he found it hard to walk upstairs to the bathroom. He found it hard to hold on to the banisters because he was getting weaker and he couldn't pull himself up the stairs. And my concern was that he would sort of fall down because he was struggling to get up the stairs, and he was getting out of breath, and he was weak as well with all the sort of ailments and age as well. So as he got into that situation, I spoke to social services, adult social services. They sent over a physiotherapist who assessed Dad and decided that it wasn't the right place for him. Because I had banisters put in my house. I had grab rails and things like that to help him, but she said that wasn't enough. He needed to really go into, what would they call it? Like a sort of like housing.
Sheltered housing?
Sheltered housing, yeah. That's where he was then moved to. And that was not far from me, thankfully, so that I was able to sort of see him on a regular basis.
Because that's what I was going to actually ask you about. What adaptations did you have to make? Because I think a lot of people don't understand that when you are a carer, it's not just about the way you live, it's about the way they live as well. You have to make adaptations to your property. So you mentioned you got some railings and bits and pieces for your father. Was there anything else that he needed when he was with you physically?
Well, he had a carer coming in because I used to work as well. So I managed to get a carer that would come in because Daddy couldn't see very well and he couldn't walk downstairs unaided to really get himself his breakfast. So the carer, I mean, I'd make his breakfast for him, but he had a carer to help him to wash. And, you know, so she would come in my house every day and they'd come and help him to wash and just sort of make sure he was okay when I was at work. So I had a carer coming in.
Did you have a lockbox by any chance?
Yeah, I did. They had a box, so they would let themselves in. They had a key and a passcode, so they could access the property.
That's just interesting because obviously where I am, we've been declined a lockbox on a number of occasions, and my issue is when you become a carer and you're looking after someone, things like lock boxes and things like that are very important to have from the start because it allows you to be more flexible with your time and what you need to do as a carer. Because you can't stay in your house 24/7 letting people in. It's not practical. Yeah. So the fact that you'd done that at the beginning was brilliant because it allowed you to continue your life as well as knowing that someone was coming in to care for your father as well.
Yeah, so they'd come and give him his lunch as well because I used to work full time. So they would be, you know, I'd get his breakfast, but they'd give him his lunch and wash him when they came in and pack things away so that I didn't have to worry about that. And I also had I also got a little camera, you know, that I could put in his bedroom so I could keep an eye on Dad.
Yeah.
During the daytime if I was working. So that
was it like a little nanny cam or was
it?
Yeah,
and you can watch it on your phone. So
okay.
the carers knew it was there. I just said I wanted to make sure Dad was okay, if he needed any help. You know.
Perfect. See, that's those little things that are what people don't really think about. You know, when you're caring for someone, you're so caught up in the whole process, you actually forget about the little things. Yeah. Just the interaction between you and the other person, that your loved one. So as time went on, so your dad's now gone from your house, he's now gone into sheltered housing. How did that get on? How did he get on at the sheltered housing?
He really liked it. Initially when he went, he was, because they have a lot of activities they have sort of downstairs. I mean, you have your own flat, you know, you have your own room and, you know, your apartment, and then you have sort of a sort of residence sort of living room where, you know, they play games and music.
It's like a communal
community
area.
room.
Okay.
And they have dinner there. And he used to go down there, and he was good for him because they'd come and collect him. They'd bring his wheelchair. Oh yeah, I got a wheelchair for Dad as well.
Okay.
And I got a blue badge for him, so he had all the sort of support he could get, and it made my life easier as well. So they used to come to pick him up from his room and bring him down to the communal room, and he used to get engaged and have lunch with other people. There was quite a few residents living there.
So when he was at the sheltered house, did he need anything, other aids like commodes and things like that? Did he need anything like that?
No, thankfully the sheltered house, and it was all on his room was all on one floor, so he had everything was on the same floor, so he didn't need any much more. He had obviously his walking stick, so he managed to be able to walk to the kitchen. He could make himself something, in the microwave. He was used to be able to do things like that because he was more, he could handle that. I got him one of those chairs. I forgot what it's called now. It's like a hut. No, it was a chair like they can. Yeah, it was called a perch. And you sort of perch on this chair. It's like a very tall stool.
Okay.
So in the kitchen, you could sort of perch on the chair.
Yeah. Well, I've got one of those.
Yeah. So he had that, and obviously he had his own furniture and things like that. So he was quite comfortable, and he had a balcony. In fact, it was a very nice place, and he had also an alarm around his neck, so that
an emergency alarm.
Yeah, they would they would, if he fell, for example, he would press the alarm and they would come to see him, you know. And he had carers coming in about sort of 4 times a day. They lived in the sheltered house, and so they'd pop in and make sure he got his breakfast, lunch. He was giving his medication to him, and you know, things like that. You know, clean.
So how was your interaction? So before he got in, because obviously this is where a lot of people come stuck, is the transition from private home care to sheltered. How did the interaction work out with that in terms of speaking to social services, getting the assessments done? How smoothly did that all work out?
For me, it was fine. I'm quite pushy because, you know, you have to be if you want the best for your family. So I would call social services, and I had a social worker, she managed to. She was very good. She managed to get him. You know, he got into a care home pretty quick. But I think one of the things that did help was Dad had to go into hospital at one time, just before he got transferred to the care home. And somebody said to me, you know, while he's in hospital, it's good to speak to the social workers there as well, because they can move things even quicker. So I think that really helped as well. So he went into hospital and for a short sort of operation. And when he came out, I was sort of saying then, look, it's really important he goes somewhere where there's more support for him. And, you know, and I think he got in a little bit faster. So that helped him. But also you've got to sort of keep on the social workers anyway, make sure he gets the support he needs. So it would be, you know, physio, making sure that they was able to assess him and get him the right equipment, things like that. Yeah.
Did you have any interactions with any charities to support you?
At the time, no, because Daddy hadn't been diagnosed with dementia yet. So I hadn't really needed much support from the charity. It was okay. Okay,
so that was just the ailment side.
Yeah,
getting him due to his mobility, moving him from an accommodation which wasn't suitable, and then you moved him to sheltered housing, which was more suitable for him.
Yeah.
So most people that start out with their caring, a lot of them gonna want to know about things like, you know, did you have any additional support from family members, things like that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, of course. I have brothers and sisters, but the only thing, they live far away from me. You know, they live sort of different areas throughout London, but they would still come down, and you know, they were there. You know, if I needed sort of advice or help, they would call, and they would come and visit Dad as well. Maybe not as often because I live near Dad. But they would come and see Dad as well, and you know, make sure he needed anything. They would all contribute to it. So they helped me as well. Yeah.
So when you went to visit your dad, because this is a key thing for people that maybe have no experience with dementia and the symptoms and stuff, what concerned you to then have to get your dad tested for dementia? What was it that triggered that process for you?
So Dad, he was a very witty man, and you know, he's a talkative man. He was a joker. He's always loved to joke and laugh and make fun, and he was just very happy, simple, go lucky man. That Daddy was just as how he's always been, and I always remember him as that. And then he slowly started to. He didn't want to go downstairs. He didn't want to mix with anybody. He wanted to stay on his own. He didn't want to be as social as he used to be. So that changed. He was quite happy staying at home on his own. But he was used to his own company as well. But I think what we noticed, I think he stopped. I think it was a number of things. One thing he couldn't remember was like, because Daddy had an excellent memory, because remember things way back from when he was, you know, young. And he started to forget things. He started to look at pictures, and he didn't know who it was anymore. He didn't remember pictures of photographs of members of the family. He it was little small things like that initially, and I thought it was just, Dad's getting old. His age. His daddy was sort of 87, 88, and I just thought, Dad's getting old. But he started little minor things like that,
But that's when I think that me and you started talking about and comparing, didn't we? We compared the behaviours that was going on with your dad and the things that I experienced with my mum. And then that's when I came to the conclusion as maybe you need to get him tested for dementia.
Yeah, okay? That's right. Yeah.
That's how that came about.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not an expert, so please don't quote me on this. I'm not a doctor or anything of the sort. But when you've been around someone, especially if you're close to them, you will know when something changes. Just even if you're a child or a neighbor, you will still notice that something is wrong with someone because their behavior changes. Okay. Now, it's not always, if their behavior changes, doesn't necessarily mean it's dementia. It could be something else. But what you can do is speak to your GP and request that that test is done, because what tends to happen with dementia, especially the early stages, it's the forgetfulness is like the first thing, and they can't recall present stuff. So they can remember stuff 10, 20, 30 years ago like it happened that day. But what they can't do is recall present day. So if something happened yesterday or even a couple of hours ago, 9 times out of 10, they would forget it. They won't remember it. But if you said to them, can you remember such and such 10 years ago, they will be able to recall absolutely everything down to the T, from the clothes, from where they went, if they went in a car, if they went on public transport. I mean, the recall from the past is amazing. But then this is why it's important, because for me, what I noticed with my mother was the elaborate stories. Okay. So she would talk about things that never happened. And I know they never happened because I was here at the time. And that for me was concerning, because if someone's talking about a situation which never happened, then you kind of get worried about it. You're like, well, you never did that, or you never went to that place that you suggested that you went to, because you're kind of housebound. So how did that happen, and where is that information coming from? So for me, when it started for me, I noticed that, one, the memory, like with your dad, the memory loss and the not being able to recall the present day. But it was the stories that really made me worried, and the conversations, because normally, and I mentioned this in my intro podcast, when you're having a conversation with someone, they will listen and take on board what you're saying. They will then analyze it and then respond to what you're saying. But when you're talking to someone with Alzheimer's and dementia, they can't do the analysis side of things. What they tend to do is they will either give you a 1 or 2 word answer and then change the subject to something completely random. Yeah. And if that happens a lot, that means you can see that they cannot recall the present. And that's what triggers them to then discuss and talk about things from their past, because they cannot recall what you've just said, because the present is gone. It's vanished. They can't remember it. So that for me was the turning point for me to then get my mum diagnosed, because I knew something wasn't right. And sometimes it's quite difficult, because as a carer, always go with your gut. Always go with your gut. You will know, if you spend the most time with your loved one, you will know if something is wrong with them. You will know. Not anyone else, not the GP, not a nurse. No one else will know but you, because you are with them 24/7. So you will notice the habits of maybe they're not eating as much. Maybe they're struggling to do personal hygiene. maybe they're struggling to go to the toilet. You know, these little things, most people will go, well, that's old age. But you know deep down in your heart that it's not, because they used to be able to do those things. And there's something that has triggered those things off. So you know that's not right. So that's why you have to take the next step. You have to do it. So for you, Yvonne, what was the process of you getting your dad his full diagnosis?
Well, yes, it was going to the GP, actually. It was taking him there, asking for a dementia test for Dad, which they did. The doctor did it there with Dad, and I was surprised at how many mistakes Dad made. I didn't realise simple things he would have been able to answer. He couldn't answer, you know, because I didn't realise that he had dementia. I didn't know he did. I just thought he was just, you know, getting old and he couldn't remember stuff. But when he said he then we had the test, and he didn't sort of say exactly then. He said he would let me, you know, he'd have some further tests carried out on Dad, which he did. Then I got somebody that then came down a few weeks later and to Dad's home, and I was always there because whenever anybody came down, so I could ask questions because Daddy wouldn't really ask much. And so it's been there at the time, and they had another test more in depth this time. I'd ask him a number of questions and went through certain sort of scenarios with him, and he couldn't remember again. And you know, and then she said she was going to discuss it with her consultant, which she went away and did. And then I got a phone call a few days later telling me that Dad had late stage dementia.
So he got the full diagnosis. How did that impact him then, where he was living?
Well, I had to read. I didn't know what really dementia was because I've never had anybody I know really had it, especially someone so close to me. I mean, I knew what it. I knew what it was, but I didn't ever have anyone sort of going through it that I knew really well.
What I wanted to know is, how did it impact him? So once he was in the sheltered housing, and then you got the full diagnosis of dementia, how did that impact him while he was there, in terms of the level of care?
Well, at first, because it was kind of a slow process at first, and it sort of sped up later on, you know, as it got more and more, lost more visibilities. So initially, you know, it just meant me encourage him to eat and drink. Dad used to love his food. You know, he would insist I bought him food. Every time I came to see Dad, it was like, what have you got with me? You know, he always loved to have food. It was always, have you got any? Dad loved KFC. You know, that was his favourite. And he would always he'd eat lots of chicken, and he was always wanting food and drink. And the first thing he'd stopped doing was eating as well. He stopped eating. He wouldn't eat as much. And so I would encourage the carers to make sure Dad ate and make sure he drank. You know, could you please make sure he's eating his breakfast? Could you please make sure he's drinking? Because he's not even drinking, he needs more encouragement. But one of the big things for me, which really was quite a major change, was Dad used to call me, you see, about 5 or 6 times a day. Dad used to always ring me because I think sometimes he'd be bored, or he wasn't someone to talk to if he wasn't going downstairs. And he would always call me, you know, every minute of the day that he would call me, and the phone call stopped. And I used to ring Dad, and, you know, and it was, you know, I said, Dad, you know, you okay? And I said, you didn't call me today. And he was like, yeah, you know, and he stopped calling. He stopped calling everybody. Because he used to sit on the phone and talk to people all day long, and he stopped making phone calls. And that was a big one. So that and the food.
That behaviour, someone else that doesn't know your dad probably wouldn't have bothered. They would be like, oh, well, he's just dropped off. Do you know what I mean? That's just what happens as you get older. You just forget about people and you don't really communicate. But one major thing which I've seen a common issue with people with Alzheimer's, they tend to become quite reclusive and they stop communicating. Now, that could be answering the phone or even calling people. Mm-hmm. But what people need to understand, it's not their fault. Because a lot of people take it personally. They're like, oh, well, I used to talk to such and such all the time, or such and such used to call me all the time, and we used to have long discussions. But now I try to call them, they don't answer the phone, or they don't call me. Please don't hold it against them. Do you know what I mean? for the listeners out there, if this happens to your loved one, please don't hold it against them, because it's just the way that the dementia is developing within the brain, and it's causing this to happen. They're not doing it deliberately. If they could remember to call you and communicate with you, they would, but they can't, because that's what the dementia does. So yeah, sorry, you can carry on, Yvonne. Sorry.
No. But it was just things like that. That was the sort of two big things, and then I think more things would happen. Like he wouldn't go in the kitchen anymore. He wouldn't go and make himself a cup of tea. He wouldn't get out of bed. It's just things, and I because you don't know what they're going to do. There's no sort of set routine that you can sort of pin it on. It's just the random changes that happen, So it was the phone calls. It was the not eating, not drinking. It was the not going to go in the kitchen, not wanting to go out, not wanting to talk. And the other thing as well, which was because it was a loss of who he was, really, because the other thing that changed was that Dad wouldn't talk anymore. Dad used to talk and he would chat, and when I'd go and see him, he would just sit there and stare at the TV, and the TV was just on like nothing. It was, sort of, sometimes it wasn't even on. It just hold the remote in his hand and stare at this blank TV. And I said, Dad, what are you watching? And it was just like, it just blank. And he wouldn't watch TV. He didn't change the channels over. He just wasn't Dad. It was just
that's something I've also experienced as well. The whole TV thing, not turning it on, and the no volume.
Yeah,
is something that I've experienced personally. And for me, when you have someone with dementia, you really have to try and engage the brain, because if you don't, it kind of speeds up. And this is the problem that a lot of people will find that they're in, is trying to keep that engagement with them so the brain is continuously used. Unfortunately, depending on if the person that your loved one has additional ailments and needs, it kind of all gets muddled up. So you can't really tell what the issue is, if it's the dementia, if it's another ailment, if it's the medication, if it's this, if it's that. There's so many questions you're asking yourself, and it's very stressful. It can be very, very stressful, because you're always constantly questioning what is wrong, because you want to do the best possible for your loved one to be around for the longest possible time. So for me, when you get things like carers in, because your dad was in a sheltered housing, whereas if you're privately caring for someone, these carers have to come to your house. And I'm going to be honest with the listeners. Please, 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 please keep an eye on the carers. And I'm not saying this about all hired carers. There's a small minority out there that just don't do their job. That's the bottom line. They just don't do their job. So don't put full responsibility into their hands until you know that they're doing the job necessarily well for your loved one. And make sure you have a care plan. Most important thing is when your loved one gets diagnosed with Alzheimer's, dementia, make sure that social services puts together a care plan for them, especially if you're going to get in carers, because you'll find that when the carers start, they don't follow anything and they kind of wing it. And if you have someone that relies on medication, or if you have a loved one that doesn't eat properly, the last thing you want to do is put your all into a carer that isn't doing the necessary care for your loved one. So that's from my own personal experience. Always double check everything. Like Yvonne said, try and get even a nanny cam in the room or somewhere in the house that you can see that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's so important that I emphasize that, because it's so difficult to find good, honest carers that really take a pride in their job. So that's my view on that part of the carer thing. So as time went on, Yvonne, unfortunately, it progressed quite quickly with your father. Did he get the support? What I'm trying to get to is, did he get the support that he needed from the sheltered housing? That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes, he did. That sheltered housing, yes, he did, because I think, I had to fight for additional support, but not from them as such. And that was more from, like having, sort of a dietitian. Because when he got diagnosed, he wasn't eating and drinking. I was really concerned about that. So I went to GP, and they said they're going to get a dietitian to come down, and they're going to get a speech and language therapist to come down to assess Dad's swallowing, because I think he was starting to not swallow properly.
Yeah.
And these things were taking a long time, and I think part of the reason why there was a long waiting list was because of the COVID and situation, and there'd been lots of delays. There'd been a lot of people waiting for these things to happen, so there was a waiting list of like 3 months. It was a long time before they could see a dietitian. And in the meantime, the doctor gave me some drink. I've forgotten the name now. It's a supplement. Yeah, a supplement drink, because he wasn't drinking much now. One of the things, and this is where I did understand, but I don't understand it, but it's very frustrating. One of the things, though, is that when the carers would come upstairs and leave food in his room, Daddy wouldn't eat it. So, because he just sat there and looked at the food, and so when I came down there was food sort of sitting there, and I said, Dad, you didn't eat your lunch, didn't eat your dinner, didn't drink anything. So the carers would have to stay with Dad to encourage him. But you see, the thing is, it's a fine line, because you can't force that person to eat and drink. You can't say, no, come on, you've got to eat this. They can encourage him, but Daddy can refuse, and that's what he was doing. He was refusing to eat and drink. He was, I would have to sit there with Dad for a good couple of hours, getting him to drink and eat, because he wouldn't, I'd given him small spoons here and there, and just try and distract him. Come on, Daddy, open your mouth and eat this, and come on, eat a bit more, and come back a few minutes later, try again. And, and it takes a long time. Well, carers can't do that. They can't spend hours with one patient. They've got loads of patients, lots of residents there they've got to look after. So they would try, but then they would go, and Daddy obviously didn't have much to eat.
But that there is one of my biggest bugbears. The problem is, when you have an Alzheimer's patient, they don't tend to eat or drink, a lot of them. So my conversations with the care company was always, well, what if they refuse all the time? What if the carer comes in, right, and the person that they're caring for just says, no, I don't want to shower, don't want to eat, I don't want to drink? Because on the contract or the terms or their policies, it states that they can only encourage and supervise. Okay? They can only encourage and supervise. So I said, what happens when you get to the stage where they blankly refuse to eat or drink? What do you do as a carer? Do you just leave them? Do you just let them starve? What is it that you do? Because that's a problem for me. That is a problem for me. Because it's not like it's someone that is aware mentally of what they need to do, i.e. drink and eat. There's no awareness there. So for you to go in and say, right, I'm just going to make them some food. I've got a specific, say, 45 minutes with them. I've got to get them cleaned, then give them food, and then I'm going to leave. So if you leave that food there, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to eat it. Unless someone sits there and literally watches them, they're not going to eat or drink. So I did have this discussion with the care company as well, because there's a fine line here between, not allowing them to eat or drink and them, potentially starving. Anyway, they couldn't answer me. They just said all they can do is encourage and supervise. Okay, which is what can you do? If that's the care policy, what else can you do? But I'm trying to make the listeners aware of, just be mindful of these things, because sometimes you may need to interject and get involved a bit more with the personal care. Do not just assume that everything is happening the way that you want it to happen. Never just leave it. Always supervise, always spot check, and make sure that your loved one is getting the best care possible.
That's right.
Did you know if your dad had any end of life sort of insurance and things like that? Because a lot of people kind of forget about power of attorneys and the planning phase of dementia, because it can come very quickly depending on the person. So a lot of people tend to just think, well, they can happily live with it for years and years and years, but then they don't do the basics. Yeah. So how did that all work for you and your dad? How quickly did you manage to get that all together?
Well, fortunately and thankfully, I got power of attorney for Dad before he got dementia, because I think once they get dementia, it's a whole different ball game.
Correct.
And so I managed to get it before. It was power of attorney for, I think it was health and welfare.
Yeah, health, financial as well.
Yeah, health, that's the financials. I could, all Dad's sort of bills I could pay for him. I had access to all his medical care. I could ask questions about, his health, what I could demand to see his, sort of notes from doctors and things. And so it was really, that was so important. I did that. So I really thank God really for allowing me to do that before he became, got dementia. And the thing is as well, you don't know when they're going to get dementia. So it's something you should do anyway, I think, regardless for your elderly parents or even for your partner. I think, I even told my son, you should do it for me, because I don't know when I'm going to get it. If I do, hopefully I don't, but I'm just saying, you don't know what's out there, what the future holds, do you really?
So for the listeners that are listening in, a lot of people don't even know what dementia is. So just quickly, I'm just going to give you a quick rundown. Dementia is a range of symptoms that show that the brain has a disease. As this disease causes changes in the brain, it cannot work properly. Only some people get dementia. It doesn't happen to everyone as they get older. Most people with dementia have Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia. Fewer people with dementia have dementia with Lewy bodies, DLB, or frontal temporal dementia, which is FTD. There are other types of dementia that the smaller numbers of people get. Most people with dementia are over 65, but younger people can also get dementia, and this is called young onset dementia. There is no real evidence as to what causes dementia, but these are some of the things that might contribute to it. The risk can include getting older, certain genes, injury, aspects of health and lifestyle, for example, lack of physical activity, bad diet, alcohol, and smoking. There is a lot of research looking into the brain and why dementia develops. Now, there is no cure. If anyone's wondering if there's a cure for it, at the moment, there is no cure for dementia. People can live a long time depending on how advanced it is and any other sort of ailments that they have. People can live with it for a long time depending on how serious it is. A few bits of statistics from Alzheimer's Society. An estimated 944,000 people living with dementia in the UK. This number is expected to increase to over 1 million by 2030 and 1.6 million by 2050. Dementia is the leading cause of death in people over the age of 65. Now, those stats, I'm not sure how old they are, but I can tell you now, from the people that I know and have spoken to, I would say over half of them either know someone with dementia or has a loved one with dementia. So I think those numbers are a lot higher. We also have a problem with the early symptoms of dementia. So there's not a lot of people know what to look for and how to then escalate it to get the diagnosis that they need. So it's those numbers. Don't quote me on that. I got that from a charity, so I believe they're a lot higher. But anyway, that's what's published at the moment. Dementia costs the UK estimated 34 billion per year. This includes the cost of healthcare, social care, and lost productivity. Dementia also has a significant impact on the quality of life for the people with dementia and their families. That is really important to understand. When a loved one gets dementia or Alzheimer's, it doesn't just impact them, it impacts everyone who is connected to that person. It will impact you. And there's the public perception of dementia. There's still a lot of stigma attached to dementia. Many people do not understand the condition, and there may be fears developing dementia themselves. This stigma can make it difficult for people with dementia to access the support that they need. And that is very important to understand. When people hear about dementia, because it's not directly impacting them or their family, they tend to just ignore it, okay? I was one of them, not gonna lie. I was one of them. I used to see the adverts. I used to hear my friends talk about it all the time. And I was like, it's unfortunate. It is unfortunate. But then until it happens to you and it impacts your life, you see the world in a completely different view. And that's me being completely honest. I was ignorant to it. Until it happened to me, I was completely ignorant to it. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now to raise awareness, because people always say this. Until it directly impacts you, you tend to not pay attention to it or even have any care about it. And now it's directly impacted me, and I've seen what it's done to my beloved mother. It's heartbreaking. They lose themselves. They're not even the same person anymore. You know, they can't even hold a conversation. They can get quite aggressive. They can get quite nasty to you. And they're not doing it out of a malicious way. They're doing it because that's just the way that the brain is currently developing. So if you are a carer out there, I just want you to know that you're not alone. You know, me and Yvonne have had first-hand experience with dementia and Alzheimer's, and the challenges that we've had from social services, diagnosis, the sheltered housing, you know, the little things, the aids that they need to live, you know. There's so much that changes in your life. So much. It can be quite overwhelming. But what I want you to know is that you're not alone. You're not alone. Please ask for help. Seek help. Speak to Age UK. Speak to your local authority. Local authorities have a duty to assist you with a loved one that needs care. Doesn't matter if it's a disability or if it's Alzheimer's. They have a duty to aid and assist you, okay? But before you do that journey on your own, please speak to Age UK. They have a wealth of knowledge about this, and they have great resources that you can tap into for respite and any additional needs that your loved one might need. They really have supported me personally beyond my wildest dreams. And to be honest, I never even imagined I would be in this situation. So when it happened to me, I was oblivious. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who to speak to. I was just working with what was in front of me. And what was in front of me was difficult because it was hard to understand. It's very difficult to understand someone that you saw as a strong, independent person that was living their life and doing everything for themselves, to basically going from an adult back into a child's state. And that is what happens. And I'm not going to mince my words when I say this. They do become children again. And it's very difficult for you as a sibling, child, or just if you're connected to them in some way to see that it does impact your life and you quite heavily. So please always seek the help that is out there, and you're not alone, and you will get through this like we have. I appreciate you tuning in. Till the next time, good luck. Thank you, Yvonne, for joining us.
You're welcome, Mark. Thank you.
I'm Trisha Tharby. I'm from the UK, and I listen to Truth Hurts podcast.
Hi, I'm Steve from England, and I'm listening to the Truth Hurts podcast.
I'm Christina from the UK, and I'm listening to the Truth Hurts podcast.
Hi, my name is Mark Hegarty, and I'm from Wales in the UK, and I am listening to the Truth Hurts podcast.
I'm Jay Dean from the Netherlands, and I'm listening to Truth Hurts podcast.
Hey, what's good, people? It's Missy here. Guess what? I'm listening to Truth Hurts podcast.